everybody, Chris the old ass retro gamer here, back with another massive collaboration video. And what's the topic today? Well, the last two videos in this series have been received extremely well, so why not keep the party going? So today is part 3 in the movies that would have made great video game series. It's almost a franchise of its own at this point. So what is the point of this series? Licensed games have been a thing since video games were born. I mean, they've just always been around. Companies want to bank on a popular title to sell copies of their game to make money. Sometimes the game is good, sometimes it's not, but then not every movie gets its own video game tie-in. So this whole series is about movies that we wish had a video game tie-in and what we think the game would have been like and for which console. So who do I have lined up today as guests? None other than Widdle Brudder, Brian's Man Cave, Joe Goes Retro, Back in the Day Gamer, the QDawgs, Gameonysus, the ReNesance, Captain Algebra, Disc Cart, and JLuv81. As with all the other collaborations in this series, I'm going to alternate between 2 guests and then my choice. So 2 guests, me, 2 guests, me, so on and so forth until we are done. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it with my first 2 guests, Widdle Brudder and Brian's Man Cave.
What's up, guys? Widdle Brudder here again, the slasher, thrasher, and button masher. And my good buddy Chris recently asked me, hey brother, what is one movie that you have always wanted to see made into a video game adaptation? And that was an easy one for me to answer, and that would be none other than Titan After Earth. This is a phenomenal movie. When it came out, it didn't get the best reviews, and it was kind of like thrown under a bus compared to some other movies that came out during the time. It is about basically humans have to leave the Earth because an alien colonization is coming in to destroy the Earth, and they destroy the Earth. And for years, humans have to live in space amongst other creatures and aliens. I don't want to spoil the movie, but they figure out a way to find a certain spaceship that is able to create and sustain life as Earth again. I think this would make an excellent 2 different types of video games, actually. I think this would either make a really good adventure game during the PS1 era. If this would have came out back then, that would have been really sweet. You could have had quests to find certain things using the map. Hint, hint. They could have thrown all kinds of elements in there, like they could have had dog fights in space and stuff. You know, they could have did an awesome video game with it. But also, I think it would have made a really good point-and-click PC game as well, up with the ranks of like Monkey Island and all those. I think it would have been an awesome freaking point-and-click game. So that's my picks, and thanks for asking. That was an awesome question, Chris, and I hope you guys all enjoyed my answer.
Hey guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. I'm very honored to partake in this collaboration video, and it took me a while to think of something because most of the movies that I like have already had games. I mean, they're terrible games, but they're out there, like Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, so it was really hard, and I went through a bunch of different titles. Eventually just decided on this guy, They Live, which is a John Carpenter movie, and I think there's a lot that happens in this movie that you can really put into a video game. The idea of him putting on the glasses and seeing things was already put into another Nintendo game, which was the first Simpsons game on the Nintendo, where Bart Simpson puts on his black shades and then all of a sudden the people in the town have these zombie heads. So they kind of used this movie, this concept, to make that video game feature. I mean, you can kind of go on that same regard, you know, the platform style, but I would see this being more like, say, Castlevania 2. You know, the platform style where you get to actually beat up things, kill things, but you also get into a town setting where you get to speak to people. Like, there was a lot of scenes in this movie where he literally trying to convince people that every time he put on these glasses, he would see things that they did not see. He would see messages everywhere that they did not see. And the other thing about Castlevania 2 is it would go into that, you know, horrible Night for a Curse, where you can kind of do that same kind of option. You know, you put on the glasses, all of a sudden everything changes, everything shifts. Now, it would be a little bit more controlled because in Castlevania 2, it just sort of happens when you're playing, right? So, I mean, I just think that there would be a lot that you could explore with this movie. It's Rowdy Roddy Piper, you know, classic wrestling figure. So my choice would be They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Both fantastic choices. Glad to see John Carpenter getting some love. So what's my first choice for a movie that I wished always had a video game tie-in? Well, that would be Hackers. Hackers is one of my favorite movies from the mid-90s. It came out the same summer as Mortal Kombat. That was when, like, techno was exploding. Mortal Kombat started to introduce me to new music like techno, and Hackers kept that trend going by having this great electronic soundtrack, on top of it starring a very young Angelina Jolie.
Are you challenging me?
Yes. The movie was about a group of young high school age hackers who are getting framed by a corporation, specifically the guy who runs security for this one major oil corporation who is trying to embezzle money from the company, and he's going to blame it on these kid hackers, especially one of them in the group who has a history of being involved with the law when it comes to his hacking abilities. How do I see this working as a game? Well, the movie came out in 1995. I'm thinking that it would have been an early PlayStation game, and it would have been another one of those multi-genre style games. Rollerblading was a big part of the movie. The characters all got around on rollerblades and did all these crazy stuff. So part of it would be a third-person rollerblading game where characters are performing fetch missions where they have to get to a specific place, pick up an item like a disc or something for a computer, get some information off of somebody. The other part would be the hacking scenes, which would also be a rhythm game because of music being such a big part of that movie. I thought that mixing the two would be really cool because who wants to play a game where you're hacking? That's not fun sounding at all. In order to perform a successful hack, you would have to perform like a rhythm game, sort of in the vein of frequency or amplitude, and the more successful you are at these rhythm games, the deeper your hack. It'd be a great way to utilize the soundtrack of the movie as well as keep the game fun and interesting. So it would have been like the Parappa before Parappa. I would also say that because it's a PlayStation 1 game, you'd have separate storylines for each character like Resident Evil. You get to choose between Dade, Zero Cool, or Kate, aka Acid Burn. They would intermingle every once in a while because they do end up spending a lot of time together. It always ended with them making out in a giant pool on top of a skyscraper. I thought that would be a really fun combination of two different genres for a movie that I think is a lot of cheesy good fun, so I think the game would have to follow suit. So now it's time for my next two guests, Joe Goes Retro and Back in the Day Gamer.
Hey everybody, Joe Goes Retro here, and a movie that I think would make a pretty cool video game is Death Wish. No, not the Bruce Willis remake BS, but I'm talking about the original 1974 starring Charles Bronson in the lead role. Sounds like a kind of an odd choice, but you know what? Dirty Harry got a video game 20 years after the original film. Hey, why can't the tale of Paul Kersey go the route of Detective Callahan? It could be done. I mean, there's a number of different ways they could have gone about it. I mean, had the game been made around, let's say, the last Death Wish film with Bronson was 1995, I think. Kind of amusing since here was Charles Bronson in his mid-70s kicking all kinds of butt. But anyway, if they were to do that, that would have been 95's prime time for, like, violent video games. Mortal Kombat was out. They could do a violent beat-em-up with gunplay or something like that, or even an adventure-type game with shooting and whatnot, or just even do it as a first-person shooter. Those games were growing in popularity on the PC in the mid-90s. Heck, fast forward, make it a little more modern. Do like a GTA-type game now, where he's going around shooting up all the bad guys like he's doing right behind me, and eventually discovering a bigger plot, like some kind of crime ring. You can do it all different kinds of ways. A lot of potential, I think, in Death Wish. Let me know what you think, and thanks to Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, for having me on. Take care.
What's happening, YouTube? Back in the Day Gamer here. The movie I've chosen for my part of this collaboration starts out in 1978. Four high school buddies who make up a KISS tribute band need to make their way from Cleveland, Ohio to see the greatest rock and roll show of all times, KISS, in Detroit Rock City. That's right, we're talking about Gene and Paul live. We're talking about people passing joints around in the crowd. We're talking about big breastises and tight vestises. But before they get there, they have to overcome a gauntlet of crazy scenarios that the Motor City throws their way. So I think this movie would make a fantastic game, not only because it has a great storyline to follow, but there's so many different genres that would be represented. This game would have it all. I see it being 16-bit, looking a lot like True Lies, good-looking sprites, dark, low-lit atmosphere. Detroit's perceived to be a scary, mysterious place. It's portrayed well that way in the movie. The game would begin where you have to break out one of your group from the boarding school his crazy mother places him in after she catches him listening to the satanic KISS music. With the help of some magic mushrooms, he escapes. Then a car chase ensues where you end up fighting some angry disco guidos. Once you make it to Detroit, your car is stolen and you're left without tickets. So the foursome decides to split up and go their separate ways to better their chances of finding tickets. So from here, there's 4 different plots to follow. One would be you have to go to the male strip club and make enough money dancing to buy your ticket from a wily scalper who's by far my favorite character in the whole movie. You need to try and sneak backstage, have to try and thwart a robbery. You need to find your missing stolen car, save the girl, and finally make your way to the big kiss show. The finale would be an awesome soundtrack, some 16-bit Kiss, Detroit Rock City. So there's my game. I hope you like it. Big thanks to Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, for inviting me to be a part of this. It was a lot of fun. Hope you like my segment. And until next time, YouTube, keep it retro!
Death Wish is something I always thought should have had a game. Never even thought of Detroit Rock City. That is a unique choice if I ever heard one. Kudos. So what's my next choice for a movie that should have been a video game? The sequel just came out this year, but the original one came out, I do believe, in 2014, and that's Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim is one of my favorite Guillermo del Toro movies because to me it feels sort of like I'm watching the Voltron movie. You can see where I'm gonna go with this. I would love to see a Pacific Rim one-on-one fighting game with giant mechs versus kaiju monsters. So this would have come out for the PS4, the Xbox One. At that time, it probably would have been the Wii U. You'd have a massive roster of characters. Each character would have had their own special moves. All the mechs and the kaiju from the movie would be selectable from the start. Maybe some special unlockable ones would be in there, ones that weren't in the movie, just to add to the roster. And then if they wanted to add in more characters, you could have had a DLC pack that adds in all the characters and kaiju from Pacific Rim Uprising, the sequel. There'd be obviously a story mode for each character. You know, your standard fighting game tropes would all have to be there. The movie focused on a few specific characters. We had all the other Jaeger pilots that we never really spent any time with. So that would be great to have story modes for all those characters also to flesh out their backstories. If you're playing as the characters with the 3-armed robot and they end up beating the game, you have a totally alternate timeline thing to work with, which is pretty fantastic. And I would love to see that kind of stuff because I love the universe that movie took place in. I mean, it doesn't sound like a fun place to live in, but I mean, it was really cool to see as a movie, so why not a video game? I always thought that that was the biggest missed opportunity when that movie came out. If there was a video game tie-in of this type when Pacific Rim came out, I think that movie would have gotten way more attention than it did because it just seems like it's set up for a video game and the movie feels like a video game. One of the robots uses an oil tanker as a weapon at one point. I mean, what did we not understand here, game developers? This should have been a thing. Giant robots versus giant monster, one-on-one fighting game. Yes, it could still happen, but enough about Pacific Rim. Let's move on to my next two guests, the QDawgs and Gameonysus.
Hello, I'm Eric.
And I'm Melissa.
And Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, has asked us to talk about what movies we think would make good video games.
Yes. You have a
What?
movie?
I have a movie.
And I have a movie.
Took us a little bit,
Yep.
but I think we've got some good ones here.
Yep.
So why don't you start?
Okay, so the movie I chose is This Is the End. It's a comedy, maybe a little raunchy comedy about rapture coming and all these friends and how they fare in this rapture and why they weren't brought up to heaven and how to get back into heaven and helping each other out or not helping each other out. And I thought this would be a good video game, and what you could do is you could play either be like a hero or a villain, and so like if you're the hero you can go around, you know, finding your friends, helping your friends, and eventually getting up to heaven, and then you could play it the evil way and saying screw y'all and going around and becoming a cannibal and just enjoying all the evil that's on Earth now. I thought that would be kind of fun, and then that way too it's kind of replayable because you play both ways. So I thought this would be a good game. It was a good movie. It was funny, and so I thought it would be a good game too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
What you got?
And the movie I picked is one of my old favorites. It's a little bit older, and it's a Mad World.
Oh yeah.
And I thought this would make a really good game. There's probably games like it, but basically the premise of the movie is that a couple of random people driving along the highway witnessed an accident and went to help the driver in the accident, and the driver told them that there's a bunch of money buried under a big W, something like 200, 300 miles away. And so the movie is about all these guys racing to try to get down to be the first one to capture or to collect this money. And so I thought it would make a good game because it could be kind of like an open world. And it's up to you to decide how you're going to get from here to this park 300 miles away, taking advantage of whatever happens to be in the environment. In the movie, they try to find airplanes, they use bicycles, they use any number of things. So I thought you could have this open world thing, and even perhaps have it be like an online game where you know, the mission starts and there's maybe 8 people, and it's up to you to figure out how to get get down there and recruit, maybe recruit like non-player characters or something, and figure out how to get down there. So it's more than just a car race. It's a race of any means to get to this money. And then one thing in the movie also, there was a police officer who was monitoring all this, and I thought that might be an interesting sort of AI antagonist to see. This police officer maybe has a little bit of an advantage, and it could be you against players, it could be you against this non-player police officer, and basically race any number of vehicles to get to the prize.
Cool.
So thought that would be a fun game. I always loved the movie, and so I'd love to see a game made out of it. So thanks again, Chris, Old Ass Retro Gamer, for inviting us to do this, and
yeah, thanks a lot.
Hey guys, Janet here, aka Gameonysus, and for my movie that I would like to see made into a video game, I have to go with Ready Player One. Now, I do want to throw out a caveat that there is already sort of a video game based on this already that exists on Steam, but it's still in beta. I don't know if it'll ever leave beta, and it's kind of only like mini games, like kind of 5 minigame-esque pieces. So this would be a bit different. It would be directly based on the movie. So it is Ready Player One, the video game, based on the movie, that's based on the book, which is also kind of already sort of based on video games. So it's very layered. Think that Ratchet and Clank game that just came out, like it's in those lines. It would be for PSVR, so like when you're in the Oasis, you're using the VR headset, but when you're just like in Ohio, like if you're thinking of the movie, you would be without the VR headset and just be playing the game normally with a DualShock controller. For those of you who need a refresher or don't know, Ready Player One is basically, there's the Oasis, which is this virtual reality world that has game components within it, and the premise is the game's creator dies, and he's like, hey, anyone who finds the Easter egg that I hid in my game will kind of run the Oasis, have all this money and all this power. So in the game, you'd be doing the same quest line, but it would also have, like I said, those other components. I can even think of them throwing in like a companion app and having you do things outside in the real world, maybe using like AR technology, because one of the big kind of themes and takeaways from the movie/book is the importance of like being present in the real world. So you can have kind of those multiple layers, and I think you can throw in an ARG for those like really intense gamers who like love digging into the lore. So you can kind of cross connect the game, the movie, and then also like the book, and combine all of those to make a really intense ARG. So then there's also like the ARG Easter egg that you can find in addition to the game's like main campaign and main story. So that's what I'd like to see. I think it would be absolutely insane and probably not very good, but a lot of fun. You'd have like shooting elements, like walking sim elements, like rhythm action elements. You could just have all these crazy things in there. So I think it'd be awesome. That's my pick. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Just like Pacific Rim, Ready Player One is a huge missed opportunity. Another movie that I would have loved to have seen turned into a video game was Attack the Block. It was a UK film. It's a movie about a bunch of street punks who live in a giant high-rise, sort of like a project in the UK, and how they deal with an alien invasion that is basically focused on their apartment complex. And all these characters have to come together, put aside all their differences, and defend their turf. The aliens are really well designed, especially the male aliens, the way they kind of absorb light because they're just pitch black. There's no reflections on them at all, and the only way you can see they're there in the darkness is if they open their mouths because their teeth glow. I see the game as being a PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 game, a third-person 3D shooter/brawler. You'd be running through all the hallways and the garage and the different apartments for all the different characters from the movie. Not a lot of the characters had guns, so it'd be a lot of hand-to-hand combat with melee weapons, but a special occasion you would find a firearm of some sort, and that would sort of be like God mode. As the story progresses, you would swap characters. Each chapter is a different character, so you get different playstyles. Some of them might be faster than others, some of them might be more agile, some of them are small, they can get into crawl spaces and whatnot. Some of them have the ability to drive, some of them have a skateboard. A little bonus minigame would be riding bikes away from the creatures, but just beating the crap out of these aliens, finding ways to take them out with your environment, because there's a lot of sort of environmental deaths that take place in the movie. Maybe they'd have to introduce a few new aliens to keep it from just being one specific type that you're fighting the whole time to keep things interesting. Maybe a younger version of a male or a really older version of a male is a completely different thing. There would also have to be a section that has to do with UV lights. Watch the movie to find out what I'm talking about, because it is really screwed up. I just think it would be a lot of fun. It's like a unique setup for a 3D beat 'em up. It'd be great if we can get a British company to develop it. How many times can they work the word bruv into a video game? I want to see that happen. I think that sounds like a lot of fun and really enjoyable. I really enjoyed the movie, and I always thought it would have made for a great video game, obviously, if I'm talking about it here. So now for my next two guests, so-called arch rivals.
The irresistible force meeting the immovable object.
The ReNesance and Captain Algebra.
Hey folks, ReNesance here, and I knew exactly which movie I was going to choose for this the moment Chris invited me in on this collaboration, and that movie is The Princess Bride. One of my favorite childhood movies, and still in my top 5 today. The Princess Bride is like nothing I've ever seen before. Its perfect blend of action, scenery, quirky dry humor, medieval setting, and visceral emotion is what for me makes it a perfect choice for this topic. Now, which console would this game be on? Well, it's me, so we're gonna go NES, of course. There are so many great moments in this movie that would lend themselves perfectly to some action-packed and story-based gameplay. So I could see it, you would start out as this mysterious man in black character, you embark on this intense boat scene, you climb up the cliffs of insanity, upon which the level will climax in this fencing duel against this new character. And once you defeat him, in the vein of Castlevania 3 perhaps, you could befriend him, and he would become part of your party, and become a playable character from that point on. And likewise, you would continue with like a wrestling match against Fezzik, and then maybe like a puzzle-based challenge against Vizzini as well. Now at this point, I would love to see the game unfold into more of an action RPG type thing, where after you save and you lose the princess and you traverse through the fire swamp, you then have to complete side quests. So in the vein of a Final Fantasy game, you have several different storylines to understand and different, loose ends to tend to based on the different characters in your party. So for example, you would have Indigo trying to find Count Rugen to kill him to avenge the death of his father. Fezzik might have to find the 4 white horses to set up the escape. And of course, Wesley being the main character, he has to cope with dying, coming back to life, and then of course setting up the final battle against Humperdinck to finally release the princess from his evil clutches. So picture like a Final Fantasy meets Willow meets Wizards and Warriors type thing. And had this game existed, it would have made my NES years even more enjoyable than they already were. So there you have it, folks. That is my contribution to this collaboration. Thank you so much, Chris, for inviting me, and we'll see you all soon.
Hey everybody, Captain Algebra here, and I want to thank the old-ass retro gamer for asking me to be a part of this collaboration on movies that would have made great video games. So those are two of the things that I love, video games and movies. And so I thought back to the 80s, one of my favorite movies from when I was a kid. Probably scared some people, but I thought it was hilarious, and it's Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Now this was a movie that came out in 1988 about some people that found this big circus tent in the woods, and some clowns came out of it, and they attacked people using, circus gags. You had a bunch of clowns coming out of the clown car. You had popcorn guns that the popcorn ate the people. You had cotton candy that the people were stored in after they were caught. You had pies that basically were made of acid. All this crazy stuff, and you even had a giant clownzilla at the end that you had to pop his nose to beat him. I mean, this would have made it for a great video game. So I actually have 2 ideas real quick. First one, an NES game because it came in the 80s, similar to Monster in My Pocket. So it'd be an action platformer, going around, fighting the clowns, avoiding their popcorn guns and their giant balloons and their acid pies, all while eventually getting to the grand finale boss, Clownzilla, where you have to attack his nose until it pops and spaceship blows up. The other one would be a Super Nintendo game similar to Zombies Ate My Neighbors. So you go around each level, different locales from the movie, fighting all the different clowns, having to save people from those cotton candies. Now I know in the movie I'm pretty sure the people are already dead once they're in the cotton candy, but maybe they could have changed that a little bit for the game. You collect all the people, stage is over, you move to the next one. And as usual, just like in Zombies Ate My Neighbors, there's some boss fights like the giant baby and stuff. Giant Clownzilla would be perfect for it. So again, I want to thank the old-ass retro gamer Chris Pico for asking me to be a part of this collaboration, and I hope you enjoyed my pick.
One of them I'm surprised never got a video game adaptation of some sort, and one that I'm not surprised never got one. But they're both awesome. My next choice for a movie that should have been made into a video game is based on an indie science fiction movie from 1990. It was the movie that made me want to become a filmmaker. I went and saw it opening night with a friend of mine and his grandfather. It was rated R. It's a hard R movie. The only way we got into that theater that night was because of my friend's grandfather taking us to see it that night. It took a lot of convincing to get him to go, and we did, and we both were blown away, especially me. I'd never seen anything like it. It was so visually stunning. The music in the movie was fantastic. It's called Hardware. It's sort of like Alien. Instead of an alien, it's a killer robot, and instead of taking place in a giant spaceship, it takes place in an apartment complex, specifically one apartment. And how this woman has to play this cat and mouse game with this killer robot for an entire evening, all the different characters that come in and out of the apartment and kind of meet their demise. I see it as a survival horror game, like a sci-fi horror version of it. Sort of like Dino Crisis, I guess, but instead of there being rabid raptors, it's, you know, this psychotic population control robot. And I don't think it should be specifically like Resident Evil. I think it needs to be a combination of Resident Evil and Clock Tower, specifically the Super Nintendo Clock Tower, where it's all about hiding. So because being in one specific apartment doesn't sound too exciting for a game, it would have to take place in the entire apartment complex. And it looks like a very huge complex. And it's after an apocalypse, so everyone's kind of nasty and gross. The lead character, Jill, has this creeper that's spying on her from across the courtyard all the time, and he ends up coming into the mix at one point. The robot does a lot of really cool things. It has like 6 limbs, each one has a different weapon, and it has syringes for teeth that inject you with a drug that makes you enjoy the cyanide death you're having. It's really bizarre. There needs to be combat in it because obviously you're gonna have to fight off the robot at some point. You can't just run and hide all the time. There's gonna be other characters you come into contact with, like the security guards that show up at one point. Jill's boyfriend, Mo, shows up. Shades, Mo's buddy, that's like a crazy stoner. All these different characters would come into the mix at some point to help tell the story, move it along. There'd be gunplay, there would be melee fighting, as well as all the hiding and cover mechanics. I think the cover mechanics would be great, but since this movie came out in 1990, the only way you'd be able to do this would be on a Nintendo or a Genesis. I would love to hear 16-bit versions of the Ministry songs that are used in the movie, the Public Image Limited. You know, even Lemmy shows up at one point during the movie. Having Lemmy show up in the game would be a fantastic little touch. So go watch Hardware, tell me what you think, and then tell me if you think my idea for the video game version of it would work or not. But enough about Hardware, on to my last 2 guests, Cart and JLuv81.
So when I started thinking about a movie I wanted to turn into a video game, I automatically thought about Studio Ghibli, an animation studio out of Japan that makes these awesome anime-style movies like Princess Mononoke, Castle in the Sky, Ponyo, Spirited Away, and these movies are fantastic. So I started thinking about which one of these movies did I want to pick and which one did I want to turn into a video game. I instead decided to throw out all the rules and make a giant Ghibli universe style game that brings in aspects of all of the different games into one massive open world style game. First of all, there'll be 3 different studios working on this game. You're going to have Platinum Games and you're going to have From Software working on the fighting mechanics of this game. You're also going to have Nintendo designing the open world similar to that of Breath of the Wild. You begin the game with an awesome create a character where you can kind of create your own character from different aspects of different characters throughout the different games in Ghibli. Your character will then go to the Ghibli Museum located in Japan and just be there visiting until they are pulled into a television in the Ghibli Museum and transported into the Ghibli universe. When you arrive in the Ghibli universe, you're going to be greeted by a bunch of soot balls from My Neighbor is Totoro. And they will explain to you that the Ghibli universe is all broken apart. Each story is falling apart and they can't figure out why. There's some sort of darkness that's coming in and separating all these stories out and breaking them all down. So it is your job to get in there and solve all those problems. As you go to each region of this open world, you'll find that there's a different region for every single movie, and when you get in there, you'll be able to become the character, the main character or protagonist of each of the stories. So in My Neighbor Totoro, you'll actually become Totoro and be able to go and fight enemies by flying around, using your umbrella to attack, and do all sorts of different things that Totoro did in that movie. The fighting mechanics in this are pretty simple. It is an action RPG, so you'll just be hitting the A or B button to slash or hit or use a special ability, and that's how you'll kind of get through these fights. So in the end, it's kind of a Kingdom Hearts game, but for Studio Ghibli, with a giant open world like Breath of the Wild. And I think that would make an awesome game. I love those movies, and I would love to see those characters and that art come to life, fully licensed from Studio Ghibli. So please, somebody make that happen.
Hey everybody, it's your girl JLuv81. Wow, this question blew me away. The fact that you're gonna ask me what movie should have had a video game, there are so many, but we have to pick one. One of my favorite movies from the 80s, we're gonna take it back to 1984, is going to be Police Academy, starring Steve Guttenberg and G.W. Bailey. So this came out in 1984. It's about a group of misfits trying to become police officers. So they have to prove themselves that they can and they're capable of being police officers. So hilarious. I thought it was a great movie. There are 7 Police Academy movies plus an animated series that came out in 1988. So you have 7 movies and an animated series and there's no video game? Wow. There should have been a video game. I could picture it 16-bit, so it could be Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, a cartoon like the animation. I could see that look of it. Maybe have that look like The Mask and the gameplay like Time Cop on the Super Nintendo or Dick Tracy in some segments. I can definitely picture the characters. You have G.W. Bailey, Lieutenant Harris, and he could be in there, or maybe they're gonna kidnap him. Same with Commandant Lassard. They could have kidnapped him. We have to fight crime, so you can change characters just like TMNT on the NES. So you could be Carrie Mahoney, who's the clever one, Larvell Jones, who does the sound effects. He could have the megaphone and do martial arts. Lieutenant Callahan, she does martial arts. So it could be, this could be epic. Tackleberry. Tackleberry was the trigger-happy, gun-crazy guy. So you could use him on the shooter parts of the games. I mean, or he can have a grenade launcher because that's what Tackleberry would do. And then you also have Hightower. Hightower's a big dude. He could beat the hell out of people. So you could use him when you want to beat the piss out of somebody. I mean, you could just, it depends on what is happening in the game and which character would be best for that level. So I could imagine something like that. Definitely should have been a video game. It would have been awesome. It would have been epic. This is definitely one of my favorite movies. And I want to thank Chris for including me in this segment. And I will see you guys later.
So my last movie that I would have loved to have seen turn into a video game back in the day would have been True Romance. Yes, the movie that Quentin Tarantino wrote and Tony Scott directed back in 1993. Saw it in the theater opening night, had no idea what I was getting myself into, walked out of that theater absolutely loving it. It's sort of half crazy romance movie and half drug dealing action movie. It's nuts. Since the movie had to do with a big drug deal that was going down, I see it as a GTA style game with more emphasis on the story and the love aspect of it instead of just, you trying to infiltrate a gang or, become a connected person. It all starts off with the main characters falling in love. It ends with a massive shootout between the cops and the drug dealers. Everything that happens in between would obviously have to be exaggerated from what happened in the movie because there's not really a whole lot going on in the movie that would be game worthy, but like there could be like this expanded version of this movie, like everything that could have happened does happen in the video game. All these new characters that you're going to have to interact with on your way to the massive drug deal at the end. All the things you have to do to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. All these characters that you'd interact with would give you missions to perform in order to give you money to be able to get to where you need to go. Every state you pass through from point A to point B would be a whole new set of missions. I know that the movie came out in '93, the Super Nintendo and the Genesis were still the dominant consoles. But I can see this coming out like in 95-ish, 96-ish when the PlayStation 1 came out. I know that we wouldn't be able to get a Grand Theft Auto 3 type game, but I can see it being the way Grand Theft Auto 1 was in the True Romance universe. And seeing a polygonal Patricia Arquette stab James Gandolfini in the foot with a corkscrew. That would probably have been the highlight of my year back then. To me, that just sounds like a lot of fun, like a GTA-style drug dealer sim that just follow these two characters around. You could play as each character. I'm sure you could swap between the two different characters at any time because each one of them would have their own perspective, their own specific missions to do because of their skill sets. Just like when I picked 7 in the first movies that would make great video games collaboration, it's something that you wouldn't think would make for a good game, but the more you put some thought into it, the more it kind of makes sense in a weird sort of way. Outside of that crappy Reservoir Dogs game, what have we gotten Quentin Tarantino-wise in video game form? And a lot of his stuff would make for pretty good video games if you ask me, especially Kill Bill. Ooh, Part 4. I want to say thank you to each and every one of my guests for taking time out of your schedules to film your portion of this awesome collaboration. This one was a lot of fun to do. I found a whole new slew of YouTube content out there because of making this video. And I've been watching their content ever since. Every one of these people's channels is top-notch, and you're doing yourself a complete disservice if you're not subscribed to each and every one of them. Let me know what you would pick as a movie you'd love to see as a video game below. I hope to hear from you, and until next time, I'm Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, signing off. all those crazy mechs with the weird names like Gypsy Danger and Slipshod Fraggle Tits. I don't remember. Every one of them had a weird ass name that was hard to remember.
That's the cut.